everyone, and welcome to this new episode of Geeky Woodworking. This week we have our first customer. This one is very close to my heart because it's a friend of mine who happens to own a furniture store called Ameublement Brand Source Wallet. He's located in Abitibi, and he asked me to build 2 tables for him, which means we're gonna work with real wood. That's gonna be awesome. So I'm gonna prepare the wood, first step. Second step, I'm going to prepare some molds because we're gonna pour in some resin. And finally, we'll finish those tables and send them on their way. Let's get to work. So what did I do yesterday? Well, it's simple. I brushed on some resin all over the edges of the live edge. Now I've done this on both tables. The reason for this is simple. There's a lot of contention when it comes down to sealing the wood in the resin community. Now some people say we should always seal the sides, and some people say we should never seal the sides. So the reasons to seal the edges are simple. The wood is porous and it is very dry. So any liquid that will go on it will be sucked in, which means that you will have to use a lot more resin than you think you're going to need because the wood is going to absorb some of it. Now there's also the idea that you want to create a layer that will adhere best to the wood before adhering to the resin. On the other hand, people will say that when you seal the edges of your wood, it's going to create a bond from the wood to the resin. And then when you pour the resin in, you're going to create a bond from the resin to the resin. But it will not be as strong as resin to wood, because it will be wood to resin to resin. So how do we choose which one to pick? Well, it's simple. I don't. I pick them both. So what I did was brush on some resin yesterday, and it's about 5 to 7 days curing time. So obviously this is just one day. It is not cured at all. However, the sides are dry now because they've absorbed most of the resin. But as you can see, they look still wet, which means the resin is still there. So we have the best of both worlds, because you can pour in new resin in there, which will adhere both to the resin that's already in and to the wood, because it's going to mix, because it's not cured yet. And you're going to have the advantages of having sealed your wood, because no air bubble is going to form, and no resin from the pour is going to be absorbed on the sides. So, you know, best of both worlds. So mixing the resin is pretty simple. First, you got to pick the color. Now, blue is going to be our base, and it's going to have green pearl and mint accents, which are going to give it a teal kind of color. I'm going for something light because it's going with the liner table. So first of all, we need to mix the resin. It's a 2-to-1 epoxy mix. So let's do that. So I decided to go with a more green color for the accent. Now the color isn't perfect on the camera, but you know, you get the gist of it. And now we let it sit for about 10 minutes, so that it will give us enough time to go and do the other one. It's important to wait about 10 minutes because the bubbles are gonna go to the surface, but to be honest, it's not really necessary. There's at least 2 days before it sets, and another 3 to 5 days after that to harden. So the bubbles will always have the time to rise to the surface, which is why I'm not using a pressure pot. So I forgot to say, but the reason why I will mix the resin first and then add the colors is because this resin is special in that once it starts mixing, it becomes opaque, but as soon as it is completely mixed, then it will be transparent, and that's what allows me to know when I've mixed it enough. And then I can add the colors and then mix some more just to be safe. Now for the darker table, I'm going to use a darker resin. So I'm going to use black to create the base, and then I'm going to add some copper and bronze accents. Don't be surprised, it's not gonna fill everything. I need to do 4. Well, as you can see, the resin is done. It is very solid. And so it's been a few days since I've poured it. So now there's a lot of work to be done with the router to make sure the table is flat. So it's going to be a lot of that. Hopefully only a little bit of that for you guys. Now that everything is squared off, all that's left to do is a little bit of sanding, counting about probably 4 or 5 hours of sanding. And since I'm gonna have to suffer through it, I figure, why not you two? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna film all of it, and I'm gonna give it to you in slow motion. Let's get started. Wait, what? Oh, come on! Well, after 5 million years of planing and then sanding, the rough part is done. What's left now is to router the edges, so that's what I'm gonna do right now. After that, I'm going to place the inserts to set up the legs. And once everything's done, then I'm gonna send everything down to probably 150 on the bottom and 180 on the top. And then it'll be time to apply the finish. So here's a little sanding trick. If you have a lot of sanding to do and you want to make sure you're not missing out on any point, it's the pencil trick. So what you're going to do is you're going to put pencil marks all over your surface, and for every grit you go, you put back more pencil. And you sand down until there is no more pencil marks, and that will tell you that you sanded everything. And if you're wondering which grit of sandpaper you should use, well, the calculations is simple. You always use 50% higher than what you're using currently. So you start with 60 grit, 50% of that is 30. Let's go with 80 grit as the next one, and then 50% of 80 is 40, so 120 for the next, and etc. until you're done. Now, as I said before, the top here is only going to be 150. That's because the finish I'm going to put on top of it is bonding much better when it's at 150. And now it's time for the moment that everyone's been waiting for. Well, who would have thought that so much work would fit in such tiny little packages? Anyway, the tables are done and they're ready to be shipped. They've been packaged pretty well, I think. And, you know, we'll see how it goes. They're going to be sold soon, I hope. And, well, maybe we'll do more in the future. Well, it was a bit of a longer episode this week. Turns out that filming 50 hours of work, you know, that takes more than 5 minutes to show. Well, hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you did, I would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe. But in any case, I hope you had a good time, and I'll see you next week.